Hi everyone. How's your DevConf been today? Okay, I can definitely hear it from the enthusiasm. Welcome to my talk. Thank you for being here. I'm very appreciative of that. If you don't know, title of today's talk is "What to Do When Your Developers Are Too Scared to Deploy Their Very Own Code." Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, but in any case, that's what we're going to talk about. So just to set expectations real quick, this talk is very much a case study of things that I've noticed through teams that I've worked with over the years, some patterns, and then what actually happened with a specific team where all of these things kind of came to a head. Right? We're going to talk about some very specific scenarios that happened. Obviously, I'm not going to name people's names and stuff, because it's on YouTube and so. But then through those scenarios, I'm going to explain what we did, what we tried, how it worked out. And then I hope at the end to also equip you guys with some tools and processes you can follow to also address similar concerns in teams that you may or may not work with. All right. Cool, let's get started. So first up, you're probably going to wonder, why am I the person talking about this? So that beautiful guy on the slides over there, that's supposed to be me. I am Andreas Nel. I am a team lead at Intellect. Intellect is a software consultancy with a global footprint. Our head office is in Melrose Arch. And then we have offices in Centurion, here in Century City, in Durban. And then outside of South Africa, we have offices in Zimbabwe, England, the Netherlands, Australia, and New Zealand. And we aim to provide an end-to-end technology solution to our customers. We work with a lot of big enterprise and corporate customers, including some of the big banks, big medical aids, mines, you name it. All right, myself, I have about 8 years of experience in software engineering. I kind of grew up on web technologies at a small company developing software for managing medical practices. So I've worked with your PostgreSQL, I've worked with Python. I've had the joy of building window managers in Knockout.js. And yeah, so after that, I moved to Intellect, and since moving to Intellect, I've had experience in building cross-platform mobile applications, as well as on-prem and cloud-native technologies. And I'm currently working in a team at a bank managing a very highly performant distributed system for managing digital payments for their mobile application. So if you can't make a payment, don't call me. I know it's down. And I assure you, I am working on it. And so with that, I would like to confess that I have also done some stuff to production systems. Unfortunately, I have made mistakes. I've brought production down. I've sat on calls where I rolled out a change that only applied to one database schema, not all the other thousands of database schemas. I've sat in calls where I had to work together with my seniors and fix things until 5 a.m. in the morning, and it was still not great. I've also learned the value of a well-constructed where clause. And we'll leave it at that. Thankfully, I have also brought production up loads of times in my life, whether by myself or with the assistance of my team members. Right? So if that wasn't the case, I probably would have been an imposter and not supposed to be standing here. Right? In my spare time, I played Dungeons and Dragons. I've recently delved into becoming a dungeon master, so you might see me at Comic-Con. And then I also play board games. Great. And in that vein, I'm going to tell you guys a story. But first, I want to define what I'm talking about when I talk about deployment fear. So deployment fear, as defined when you do a quick Google search, it refers to the anxiety or apprehension that someone feels or experiences when rolling out new software or changes to a production environment. Right? It's when you're too scared to press that button or run that script because you're worried about failing, that something will go wrong. A customer will get impacted, someone's going to shout at you, you're going to lose your job, you're going to get fired, you're going to go homeless, something's going to explode, and the sky's going to fall down, and we're all going to wear blue hats. That feeling, that's what I'm going to talk about. And with that, I'll dive into why is this actually an issue? We all feel this thing, and it's natural, but when does this become an issue? Well, when it gets too bad, when it filters throughout an entire team, there are a few symptoms that you can experience. First up, there's something called stalled deployments, where your team's been working and their code is ready to go, but no one wants to actually press the button and put it out there. Then you get something called panic rollbacks, where people actually do the deployments, they go live, they sit in production for a while, and then there's a small blip on your error rates, or something completely unrelated happens and you panic and you roll back, right? For example, I rolled out an error message change, and then the very next day a certificate expired, and someone was like, oh, it was that error message change that did this thing, and we rolled back. Those kinds of panic rollbacks. A third symptom that you can experience when this gets bad is something called hero deployments. We all know the term hero programmer, I hope, right? It's that guy who always swoops in to save the day and then he leaves, who works in his little corner. There's something called hero deployments where only those hero programmers are actually allowed to deploy, or there's a dedicated firefighting team who always come in and save the day for everyone. But the team actually responsible for the service is not equipped to handle their solution and the deployments end to end. And then finally, one of the more indirect symptoms of this kind of thing is an overloaded QA process. Because something goes wrong, and obviously someone will say, "Hey, it was the QA's fault. They should have tested this thing." And so the QA says, "Okay, yeah, sure, I should have tested this thing." So they add it to their backlog, and they add it to the list of scenarios that they need to test. And so it goes on and on and on and on for years, and eventually your list is like this long. These are the symptoms. So, story time. Entering the stars of the show, the team. This team that I'm talking about, they take care of a handful of services that should run 24/7. Remember, we're working with payments here, right? There should be no downtime whatsoever, no customer impact, and the error rate should not increase whatsoever. That is the expectation. How this team approached deployments back when I joined them is deployments were discussed in weekly meetings, right? The team meets every week. They talk to each other and say, what are we going to deploy? When are we deploying it? Because we need a date, These deployments, however, and what gets deployed was tracked across multiple apps. There was Jira boards, there was Confluence pages, there was a random Teams planning board, there were some Excel spreadsheets floating around, and once in a while there was an email coming through. After taking into account all of these very consistent things, this team would discuss these different changes and decide on whether they're going to deploy them at a certain date or not. When the team was asked, can we deploy multiple services on the same time? We have one that's for purchasing certain vouchers, one thing that this guy's certificate has to be renewed, and another thing just has to get like a little reboot of the server. The team's response would be like, no, we don't. We feel it's too risky. And the conversation would end. All right, so we then said, okay, we can't do multiple services. How about we do multiple changes, right? We have a little feature here, we have a bug fix over here, we have some formatting changes. And the team would respond and say, no, it's too risky, it's too many things. We would whittle it down to the point where the team didn't want to deploy more than one commit at a time, right? You name it, certificate renewals, error message updates, formatting, tests, whatever it was, the team's response would always be, it's too risky. However, sometimes we succeeded, and we decided on a deployment date. Yay. The team would then go and say, okay, we have a deployment for fix reference bug. And on the day of the deployment, they would go to the master branch, and they would search for that that commit, and they would cherry pick it to the release branch. Right, yes, I do see the face palms. And this continued, right? Next deployment, we would go back to that release branch, and we'd look through master, and we would hope someone had a very good named commit message, and we would cherry pick that commit. And that's the one that gets deployed. At best, this team deployed about once a month, which averaged around 6 to 9 deployments a year, which is obviously pretty bad for a delivery rate in a modern software team. And now, having heard all of this whole story, I'm sure some of you made the same kind of assumptions that I made when I joined this team initially, where this is some form of ignorance or incompetence on the team's behalf. Right? They don't care, or they don't know what they're doing. Right? I'm seeing some nods. I'm pretty sure all of you saw this. Now, I would like to challenge you on this one, because ignorance is when people just don't care about what's going on, what they don't know. And the challenge is, if the team didn't care, why would they be scared of deploying? Why wouldn't they just yeet the code into prod and let it be? If the team didn't care, why would they go into your retros and say, this process doesn't work, I'm stressed out, I can't function? And also now on the incompetent side, why are you hiring people that don't know what they're doing, right? Senior engineers or engineers don't just become incompetent, don't just start out incompetent, right? You go through an education, you go through university or a boot camp or whatever you do, you go through your whole interview process, you get vetted, you'll get put in a team, you have a handover process, you have an onboarding process, you learn these kinds of things, only to say these guys don't know what they're doing, they can't do their jobs. Something doesn't click, right? So, I'm sure you've seen this, how easy it is to assume this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through 6 scenarios that we went through that was very specific stuff that in this team was actually the cause of this deployment fear. And I would like you to notice how easy it is to think this was some form of these things, and then do some introspection and think, but what is actually going on behind the scenes, beneath the surface? All right. Cool, so let's go into our first scenario. In the first scenario, the team couldn't at any point in time tell you what's the difference between what's in production and what's in test. You remember the cherry picking thing? You know, this has been going on since 5 years before I joined the team. So imagine developing on master, cherry picking, and then you go and you dev and you cherry pick and you cherry pick and you cherry pick, and eventually your branches look like this. Right? So if you're on a master branch and you're looking at a specific line of code, you were not guaranteed to know whether this was actually out there or not. When you had a bug in production, you had to do a lot of work to go and find where is this magical branch where people cherry-picked stuff to find out where this actual fix came in. And what was interesting is this team actually did have an automated deployment process. There were pipelines in place for these kinds of stuff. But they didn't use it for whatever reason. And eventually it got to the point where this deployment process wasn't suitable for how far the application stack is developed by that point in time. The team actually went so far as writing down a 21-step manual process on a Confluence page of what you had to execute. And then every time there was a deployment, all the engineers would jump onto the call, they would go through the steps. And then this deployment takes 4 hours at night. Next day, everyone joins at 8 a.m., they work, they prep another deployment, and then at night, 4 hours again. And so you get people who are burned out, and your entire team can't work anymore. So what do? The first thing that we try to do is say, okay, this is stupid. Let's just take what's in production and put it in test. What's the worst that could happen? Well, the worst that could happen is that 8 months worth of work can get erased, right? And which we didn't realize. Or what we also found is that actually it was so far apart that your test servers weren't even running the same framework. So we dug deeper. Why is this the case? Why did people work on this? Why did people stop using the automated deployment process? And what we found is as part of the onboarding process, when people showed you how the code base works or how you deploy, that process would be someone sitting with you on a call and showing you the steps. Right? Or they would point you to that Confluence page and you would just run it blindly. But no one actually understood why some things had to be done. And what eventually happened is, you know, people are people, things get lost in translation. And so everyone eventually got to a point where they did their own little take on the deployment process, because nothing was actually ever concretely written down as this is the exact steps you need to do and why. Right? The team didn't understand why they had to do certain steps, but someone just told them do it, otherwise it's going to break. So what we did is we had to set the standards, some of these basic standards. I'm not going to go into the most detail of them. If you want to know what that kind of stuff looks like, go listen to Donald's talk directly after this about the art of about continuous delivery. Right. But we had to go and actually from first principles go and say, this is what we expect from people in the test environment, in the code reviews, and in what a process should look like when we roll something out to production. And it had to be written down in such a way that people could follow it, and that we could also keep each other accountable to this process. All right, first scenario. Second scenario we encountered is you couldn't trust your test reports. You have a QA team, right? You do your code as developers. You also obviously write your automated tests. You get to a point you have your 80% code coverage, whatever your threshold is. And then you would give the QA your ticket, which is fix the bug, and the QA would test, and they would sign off. We would deploy this thing, and then things would still happen. Production would still go down. Servers would still die. right? We would do a small framework upgrade, and then suddenly there's memory leaks everywhere, and services are dying within 2 seconds of starting up, but not in the test environment. So what we found was actually an issue here is that all of the QA work, all of these quality checks outside of the normal standard unit tests and integration tests was done by the QAs manually. So what they would do is they would then, every time something happens, they would add another thing to their test case. And remember I talked about how long that backlog was. That backlog became so long that by the time the next deployment came around, that person wasn't even done with his regression testing yet, so they had to rush through the rest. Or the thing became so long that it kind of pushed out the cycle and pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. Deadlines were getting missed. Teams were saying this QA is slow. Because this team was, or this person was always focused on manual testing, and he wasn't empowered or enabled to actually write his own automated tests. What we had to do is we had to be honest with ourselves. We fucked up, right? You can't just yeet your code to someone else and say, do it, test it. So we had to pause and postpone quite a lot of deadlines and say, guys, we're going to prioritize actually some automated API testing that the QAs who are not technically enabled people can also write on. Right? So we wrote a little custom thing. They have a bunch of JSON files that they can write in. All those use cases that they used to do manually are now in a framework. Similarly, with a lot of our servers, they tended to perform very badly under load sometimes. So we had to make sure load testing wasn't just executed by people, but repeatable. Right? So what we went is we invested a lot of time in actually crafting load tests and putting it in a centralized repo that each of our developers can constantly contribute to. And if at any point in time you're not sure about whether something can work, just run the tests, right? And then we run through quite a lot of unit tests, quite a lot of performance tests, and we can then evaluate, okay, what's going on? How do we make this better? Right, scenario number 3, which I think a bunch of you already picked up on, is everyone was busy with a lot of busy work. We were so busy patching, taking the water out of the ship, we forgot to patch the hole. Right? This is the things like prepping time with the cherry picking of different commits to address sequencing and prioritization issues. It was things like prepping on the day of the deployment and not doing the same artifact as the one that was signed off on. It was about it was when the team was not actually being clear about everything that was contained in the release artifact because they thought the badly worded Jira ticket was enough. And it was also about juggling support together with this service. Right? You know, if you have a lot of support issues, your mindset is you just want to get this guy off of your back. You just want to get that ticket out. But you're not actually enabling the other person to solve the issue themselves the next time they come across this. Similarly, the team was always with deployments, having the entire team on a call at night and then having everyone work again. That's not sustainable. It's not scalable. It leads to burnt out teams. It leads to stressed people. And so what we had to do is we had to actually sit down and prioritize ruthlessly with what we're going to take into production, what we're actually going to merge into our master branch, and then how we're going to go ahead with our deployments. The team actually went across this whole cherry-picking process in the beginning because they had a need to deploy features out of sequence because sometimes your dependencies aren't ready or there's some governmental regulations coming in, so you cannot actually go live. And so the team just didn't use a concept called feature toggles. Or they had it, but it wasn't a standard to make it part of every single thing that you do to this code base. So we first had to set that standard, use the feature toggles. All right? We also had to set very clear boundaries of which decisions could be made. It is not your business stakeholders, it is not their responsibility to tell you whether you're allowed to roll out a framework change or not. It is yours. Right? You are the technical expert. And you need to act like it. We had to get that message across to the team. Right? You cannot put all the decisions that you need to make as a team in the hands of people who don't understand your technology and your landscape. And then similarly, we need to make sure that there was clarity and written sign-off on release candidate versions instead of signing off on specific features. Because that was also kind of a thing that caused this whole cherry-picking thing and this long process, because people were signing off on individual features and saying you're only deploying this, when in fact what you should have done is looked at what the sequence was in which things were actually developed, what was in that version of the code, and then what does that cover. All right. Small mindset shift, big impact. Another scenario that we actually encountered, which we didn't think was going to have such a big impact, but it was that the team never saw the value in the work that they were doing. right? And this is particularly prevalent in back-end teams. You know, when you build an app, when you build websites, you can show something, it's flashy, there's animations, you can get that instant feedback. Your back-end team is a bit more difficult. You can't just show someone a Postman request and tell them, look, I did something. You know? Similarly, your technical diagrams, solutions architects and technical leads love those things, but your business stakeholders and your domain experts, they don't care about your architectural diagram. They care about the value and the feature going live. And then what we also saw with this team is when they did deployments, they were never actually thanked for like, hey guys, good job. Well done on actually getting something out in production. And they got desensitized because the only way they knew something went live or was successful was the error rate didn't go down. So there would be deployment, and we'll say, oh, the error rate is still 0.2%. Tomorrow, another deployment, big feature. Oh, the error rate is still 0.2%. But no one buys into 0.2%, right, unless you're doing VAT increases or stuff. What we had to explain, and not necessarily to the team, but to the people around the team, is that just because there's developers here doesn't mean they only care about the code. You know, you want to know that the work that you're doing actually matters to people. If you're turning off a certain notification feature that costs a lot of money, you want to know that you saved your business 30 million rand this month. Right? You want to know that when you you've rolled out a certain optimization, customers aren't taking 5 minutes to do something, now they're taking 10 seconds. But those things were always kept on the analytics side and the reporting structures outside of the team because people were worried that the devs don't want to get distracted. And what I want to tell you, if you're in this room and you are in those kinds of things, make sure that feedback filters down to your team. I'm not saying have alignment sessions and have big full-day playback sessions and invite the entire dev team, but send through an email every now and then. Tell your team, hey, the work you're doing is valued. And when they make a mistake, right, because mistakes happen, you know, and there's a difference between making a mistake and being reckless. And I hope most software engineers tend not to be too reckless. But when they make a mistake, ensure that people understand that's okay. We have a rollback plan in place, and we can recover from this. All right. And then tying into this, we found that people didn't actually trust the developers that they could do their job, right? Because of past experiences. They had bad deployments that went wrong, and so people would come down hard on them. And then this team would be under so much pressure, so they would just code things and hope things go for the best. Make a mistake, cherry picks, people think they can't do their job. And that messaging kept coming through the whole time. And you know, if people around you keep telling you you can't do what you know you should be able to do, eventually you're going to internalize it. You guys are experts. You've studied, you've worked, you've experienced a lot of things in your past. But if people around you keep telling you you can't do your job, you're going to start thinking that's true. And this is something we call learned incompetence, where people keep thinking maybe the people around me are right, and I am bad. I don't know what I'm doing. And the difficult thing here is that it's a people thing. It's not a process thing that you can fix. You have to actually go to that person, the little guy here at the computer, and tell him, hey, you actually do know what you're doing. Affirm that person's experience. Affirm the skills that they have and the education they have. Secondly, the people around this person also have to be made aware of the effect that they're having on them, right? It's okay to complain. It's okay to tell people, like, I don't think this team is performing to the level that they should be, but not in stand-up every day or every retro or every sprint review. Have those clear communication channels where this person is, for example, don't go and tell the junior engineer he doesn't know what he's doing. Speak to the person's lead, speak to their seniors, and help them grow instead of trying to beat people down. And that's a difficult conversation to have because people feel like they're keeping people accountable, and there's different ways of doing that. All right. What we also find that was interesting is there was an assumption on how things actually worked from the people outside of the developers team. They assumed there were certain processes in place or certain processes not in place. And what we had to do is we had to tell them, listen, guys, we actually have a lot of observability tools. We can tell you exactly at what point something went wrong and what the impact was. We have something called blue-green deployments. And I don't know if every one of you kind of know what a blue-green deployment is. Right, we had to explain to our business people what a blue-green deployment actually is. Right? You can't just tell someone we have it and then assume they're going to know it's going to help with your resiliency. So don't be scared to involve your business people and your less technically oriented people in the actual work that you do, Show them the things that you do every day, and you'll find that people become much more reasonable when you make certain requests or demands, or when you say, I can't do something. All right. And then our final scenario that we're going to look at is sometimes you have toxic or difficult individuals in your team that are actually the cause of the deployment fear in your team. All right? This is the guy who's been there the longest, who keeps saying the system is bad, the environment is bad, I don't want to work here. This is the senior who goes in the code review and tells everyone they don't know what they're doing, he can do it better. Right? This is also the person who constantly complains about meetings in their retros, but they never put anything on the retro that says this is something we did well. Right? And it's also a difficult thing because it's a person thing. So what we had to do with multiple people, right, or not multiple, like 2 or 3, as a first thing, you assume it's an awareness thing, right? People might not actually know that they are being difficult, right? So have a conversation one-on-one, never in a group chat, because then you're kind of giving the idea that you're bullying them or calling them out. But have a one-on-one conversation. Let them know what's going on. We had a conversation with a senior who was actually one of the top performers in the team, and he understood that. He told us, okay, I understand, I'm not going to continue with this behavior. I'm not going to keep telling people they don't know what they're doing. I'm not constantly going to tell all my teammates that all the code they're writing is shit. I'm going to help them get better. And we looked. And he did that for 2 months, and then he went back to his old habits. Right? So, at that point, we had to make the decision of, even if this guy is the highest performer, the ripple effect has on the rest of his team means that the entire team is actually being brought down, even though this guy writes a lot of code. So by removing that person, you actually enable the team to be in a better psychological state, and a team of average individuals will always be better than one 10x developer. Cool. And then what I think everyone needs to understand is this person can also sometimes be you, right? It can be you might not know. And what's important here is what's best for the team and the project, not what's best for you. All right? It can also be your boss. It can also be your business stakeholder. And there's some various different ways of handling those things. And what I think a lot of people struggle to understand is that you are never alone in your team. You have channels available to you. You're supposed to have a close relationship with your lead if it's one of your peers that's having an issue. If your lead is actually the issue, use your HR department, have examples, and tell them, listen, me and the team are having a tough time over here. We need you to come check. I think too easily we're scared to reach out to the channels available to us in our big clients and so because we're scared of offending someone. And then we let behavior like this slide. Right. So looking at these 6 scenarios, you can see that not all of them are actually in ignorance or incompetence. Right? There are various factors of it, but sometimes it's something deeper. And what we found is the things that we need to look at are these 5 types of stuff. This is generally where people get influenced from with their deployment fear. So I'm going to start from the bottom left. Right? So first thing we're going to look at is your environment. Right? This can be your physical environment. You know, are you sitting in a basement in a dingy place, no sunlight ever, and you get there when it's dark and you leave when it's dark? That obviously has an effect on your mental state. It also speaks to your corporate structures and your business structures and your reporting lines and so. And this ties in a lot with someone, I think it was Conway's law, that talks about your systems and your teams eventually represent the structures of the communication in your business. Right? So if it's chaotic and no one knows who to speak to, obviously everyone else is going to feel the same way. Also, if you have a blame game culture, that has an effect on whether a team feels confident that they can be deploying. Next up, we're going to move to processes, and this points to the different processes you have in your team, whether it be conflict resolution stuff, whether it be your actual code review processes, your deployment processes, and whether you actually have a good rollback strategy or not. Because oftentimes people are too scared to deploy because they don't know how to fix it when it goes wrong. Then something called knowledge. The next one we're going to move to is knowledge, which is the actual skills you have, and the domain knowledge, and people you know. Right? It might also point to certain things that you know are issues in your systems, which impact how confident you feel about your system. Moving on, experience. Experience points to not just the years of working, but also if you had bad or good deployments. Right? Obviously, the bad deployments tend to affect people more. And then finally, the support structure around you. If you don't have people around you who will have your back when you're having a tough time, or when you're struggling with a deployment and you need someone to help you out, that also influences a person's ability to feel confident in their deployment. So the advice here is when you observe an issue, see if it's from one of these areas and see which one you can address. Because typically these things also have ripple effects and they will show up in multiple other facets of a team's delivery. Cool. But obviously you're going to ask, where do I start? Right? What do I do first, and how do I know whether what I'm doing is working? And so there's this thing that comes from a lot of management consultancy places use something they call the OODA loop, which stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And it is as simple as that, right? Observe means you have to actually look at what's going on. Spend time, observe, and see what's going on. Then orient means to actually decide which problem are we going to work on, because you're going to see a lot of stuff. And then actually make a decision. That's the decide part. And then act means to follow through. And then after that, go back to your observe state. Now, this is a very simple tool, but I think where a lot of people go wrong is they never escape the observe phase. You keep seeing a lot of things going wrong where you don't actually decide to do anything about it. Or you get stuck in the orient phase where everyone says, this is a problem. We say, yes, it's a problem, and then we go on with our lives. And no one wants to make a decision. And we also get into stages where people actually then make a decision, or they just jump straight into the decision phase without actually looking at what's going on. And then you don't know why things aren't working out. Cool. So if you want to know what you're going to work on, what's best, use this loop. Keep remembering, first look, orient, actually make the decision and follow through. And then to know if it's successful, observe whether that thing actually made an effect. And what you'll find is the more regularly you apply this thing, the quicker and the easier it becomes to address some big issues and break them into small little chunks of manageable things. And then how do you know it's successful? Well, it's actually rather deceivingly simple. You're going to see a few things change in how teams deploy. Right? There's things that you can pull data from, like how long it takes to do a deployment. If it goes down and it's quicker, obviously it's going to be better for your team, because then you're not going to spend thousands of hours and hundreds of hours after hours doing your deployments. Your frequency will also start going up, because your team won't be as scared, so they won't be postponing their deployment that much. And then with frequent delivery, business people becomes happy, everyone gets their features, users are great. And then there's the things where you can't actually pull data from. Your team is going to feel less stressed. Your team's going to be more confident. They're going to speak up more. And what you're also going to find is the ability of each team member in your team to run deployments from the tech lead all the way down to the most junior person. The amount of people who can do a deployment successfully will go up. And if these things go in the correct direction, you know that whatever you did worked. All right. But yeah, with stress levels, don't just always look, ask your people what they're feeling like, and you'll find something. So back to the team that we were in, where they know. So this team takes care of a handful of services that should run 24/7. No downtime, no customer impact, no increases in error rate. That's the baseline expectation. Deployments are discussed in weekly meetings, and they're tracked across just 2 apps, a Jira board with all the tasks, and a random Teams planning board just where we have a little calendar with some dates. Then, changes are discussed, multiple services being deployed, multiple changes, features, bug fixes, error message changes, certificate renewals, and formatting. The team assumes a baseline level of risk, and they don't just say everything is too risky. They're honest about why certain changes are riskier than others, and the team is very firm on the sequence of when deployments should go, of the sequence of deployments and what is required. We deploy from our main branch, no more cherry picks. And when we prep a candidate, we agree on where do we make our cut to prepare a release candidate. A year or so ago, we averaged around 7 to 9 deployments a year. Fast forward a few years, and we've completed 20 deployments in 5 months. And we're not where we want to be yet, but we're getting there. Thanks, everyone.